good morning, Restoration community. So grateful that you're joining us online this morning. We're so excited to worship with you. We're going to get going in just a second. Like always, we're going to start by singing some songs, worshiping together, and then we're going to talk through some things that we have going on here in our community. So I encourage you to follow along. Make sure you watch in the comments so you can just stay up to date on everything. As always, don't hesitate to reach out to us if there are ways that we can pray for you, ways that we can help keep you connected. We love to do that. But we're so grateful that you're here with us this morning. Let's get ready to worship.
Good morning. Let's stand together as we sing. Oh, don't lose heart, oh my soul, and don't give up. There is hope, there is always hope. And there is peace in the storm, No, don't forget. He is Lord of all. There is a King of glory, there is a God who saves, one who is strong and mighty, freedom is in his name. Open the gates of heaven, lift up a shout of praise, there is a lion roaring, Jesus the King of glory. So lift your eyes, stand in awe. Oh, there is one, only one, where my help comes from. So lift your eyes. There is a King of glory, there is a God who saves, one who is strong and mighty, freedom is in his name. Open the gates of heaven, lift up a shout of praise, there is a lion roaring, Jesus the King of glory. Sing this together. Nations bow and mountains shake at the sound of just one name. Over all, Jesus reigns. I know. Nations bow, and nations bow, and mountains shake at the sound of just one name. And over all, Jesus reigns. I know, oh, I know. Glory, there is a God who saves, there's one who is strong and mighty, freedom is in his name. So open the gates of heaven, lift up a shout of praise, there is a lion roaring, Jesus the King of glory. Good morning. Would you turn to somebody just in front of you, behind you, whatever, say good morning to them real quick. you'll make a way. And I don't always understand, and I don't always get to see, but I will believe it. Yes, I will believe it. 'Cause you make mountains move, and you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, I will preach to my doubt. You were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. And I am standing on your word. I'm calling heaven down to earth, and you will fight my enemies, and this will end in victory. And I will believe it. Yes, I will believe it. 'Cause you make mountains move, and you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. And I know that I know you never fail. And I know that I know you never will. And I know that I know you never fail. And I know that I know you never will. 'Cause you make mountains move, and you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. 'Cause you make mountains move, and you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. Oh, you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. 'Cause you make mountains move, and you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. That you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now. Oh, you were faithful then, and you'll be faithful now.
pray with me? Lord, we are so very thankful for your goodness. I'm so thankful, and even in really challenging times, in dark times, that we can sit in your goodness, that we can reflect back on your faithfulness in our lives and see all the times where you have been so good to us because you always are. And then that we can take that hope and believe your goodness as we look forward. And so, Lord, we're so grateful for you. Lord, I ask that you would teach us more about who you are this morning, that you would speak to us whatever you want to say to each of us individually, that you would use Kevin, that you would speak through him this morning. We're so grateful for you. We love you, and we pray this all in your son's name. Amen. You can have a seat. Good morning, friends. So good to see you all. We're so glad that you are joining us. If you're watching online, good morning, welcome. We're so glad that you're here too. A couple things we're going to talk about. First of all, we got to do a hair report, obviously. I'm so proud of you all, keeping it neck and neck. I feel like you were taking Kevin on an emotional roller coaster, and I think it's hilarious. So well done. I feel like anytime something shoots ahead, somebody's going in and just like messing with these numbers, and it's making me so happy. So as you can see, we are neck and neck right now. Looks like Curl is in the lead by just one vote. Okay, so you still have time. You can go in there, you can mess with that some more, get your votes in. I'm very excited about this. Either way, it's going to be exciting. But we're having a ton of fun with this. And we just want to say thank you, too, because this is huge. It's just a way that we can really support our kids and our students this summer. And we're going to be having a ton of fun. Like Oliver shared with us last week, VBS is going to be awesome. But our student summer is also, like, packed full with fun. We're super excited about it. So this is how we're funding that. We want you to be a part of it. And then a good reminder is for those of you that want to sign your kids up for VBS to go ahead and do that. It's July 14th through 16th, but we would love for your kids to be a part of that. So that registration is open. You can find it on our website in the comments if you're watching online. For student summer, just plan to be available starting on June 13th every Sunday from 6 to 8, and we are going on adventures all over the place, okay? So if you have questions about that specifically, you can talk to me. I would love to help you out with that. Another thing that we'd love for you to sign up for is our identity class, okay? So that's starting on June 2nd. We spent a lot of time last week talking about this, but we're going to be talking about character, calling, and contributing. And this is going to be a great time together. So whether you're doing it in person on Wednesday nights or you're going to be doing it virtually, we want you to register. So again, that's all online or in the comments. Make sure you let us know if you're going to be a part of that. And then lastly, we have this job fair coming up. Now, we want you to be involved in that, whether you want to volunteer or whether you want to just help us spread the word. Okay, we've got a lot of employers that are signing up for this. We're really excited to be able to provide this for our community and care for our community in this way. So a few needs that we have, we do need some more volunteers the day of. So if you're able to be there, definitely come talk to me. We'd love to have you there. But then the biggest thing is we just got to get the word out. So I've got tons of posters. If you're like, I can drive around and put up posters, great, I'll give you 100. Or 10, whatever you want to do, whatever. Sharing on social media, that's super helpful. Inviting your friends. If you have contacts with people that you know are looking for employment, send it their way. Also, we do have a few more employer spots. So if you know of an employer that's like eager and ready to hire a lot of positions, we would love to talk with them as well. So you can send that information my way as well. As always, my email is janessa@restoretrain.com. But we're super excited about this way to care for our community and partner with Better together. So definitely come be a part of it. It's going to be a really good time. That's all I have for you on the announcement sides, but as always, fill out that Connect card. Let us know how we can be praying for you. We always want to pray for you. That's something so important to us. And we're going to continue with our series, so why don't you take a look at the video?
Good morning. Glad you're here this morning. I forgot to grab my stool before this, and man, again, the whole thing falls apart without that. It's like a magic show, and I need this to get through. So glad you're here this morning as we continue this series. I don't know, and again, the hair thing, guys, I don't know what's going on and why you guys are playing games with my heart, as the Backstreet Boys would say. Like, I feel like there's something going on there. Thanks for doing that. Also, just one quick update that I want to give you just as we are heading out of this season, hopefully, is that this week is the last week that the schools are meeting in this space. So the high school and the college have both let out. And so therefore, with our policy, following what's going on with PASCO and what's going on with the CDC in general, is that from that point on, actually masks become optional in this room starting next week, which is a really good sign just in general. Doesn't that just feel good? I don't care which side of the things you are on, it just feels good to be like, oh, things are going to look normal again. Like, I'll be able to see smiles, and I'll be able to, I mean, like, guys, just be honest with you, I can tell when you're falling asleep anyways. The masks don't help that. But I'll be able to kind of like, tell where you're at with things, and at least know when you're muttering under your breath bad things about me as I talk. So it'll be nice to be able to get back to that. So that'll start next week, actually. I know it's Memorial Day weekend. There's a lot going on that weekend, but that will start then. And from that point on, we'll be able to be masks optional. Again, if you feel comfortable with that being on, that is totally fine. That's not a problem. We want to respect either way that works for you. But that's where we'll be next week. This week, though, we've got some things to cover, and I'm excited that you're here for it. In my family, we watch mostly every Friday. Our Fridays are our day off as a family. I know that's kind of weird, but like my schedule works best to take Fridays off. We homeschool our kids, which means, yes, they make their own clothes, and they wear bonnets and stuff, and like that's normal. Don't worry about it. So we homeschool our kids, and so we do that so that we have our own schedule and our own routine because our life is kind of weird. And so I work like all day on Saturday, obviously all day Sunday. My days are full, so we take Friday off together. And most Friday evenings, we do this thing where we just order pizza and watch a movie together. Like, that's basically how Fridays end up. It's just kind of a family movie night. And we do that together. And a couple weeks ago, there was a movie that I really wanted to watch with the kids. I had kind of scoped it out to see if it would be something they would be interested in. And I think it was something they would really like. And so I was like, guys, I want to watch this movie with you. And they were like, what's it called? And I said, it's called My Octopus Teacher. And they were like, what's that about? Now, has anybody seen this movie? Anybody seen this film on Netflix? I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell everybody. And I get the same look that I'm getting from you, even behind your mask, is the look of like, oh, that sounds terrible. And it's a movie, and the description doesn't help. Like, when I give you the description, when I give you the story, you'll be like, oh, no. It's about a man who is going through kind of a crisis in his own life, and he starts scuba diving or snorkeling in his area in South Africa and becomes friends with an octopus. And the octopus teaches him things about his life and helps him like learn to deal with certain things. And it's a beautiful story. And I can tell right now you're doing what everybody else does when I say that. And they're like, well, that sounds terrible. And you have a terrible choice of movies. Have you not seen like The Avengers or something? I don't know. And so I every time I tell people that's basically the result I get. And I told my kids that, and they were kind of like, oh, cool, Dad, that'll be great. And so we watched the movie. Now, they loved it, and it's a great film. Again, I will highly recommend it. It's beautiful, just really fascinating, and it won some awards, which doesn't really mean much because you've heard of a lot of movies that have won awards that you're like, I was not into that at all. Anyways, yeah, it's a great film. And I find this a lot when you think about this. Like, every time I try to explain a story to somebody, if you really boil it down and you really get down to the smallest version of that story, it's like hard to understand sometimes. Right? When I want to explain to my kids the Mighty Ducks movies, I just tell them it's the greatest trilogy of films that has ever been created. And they don't agree with that, and they don't think that's a full enough story, but that's true. It's just the greatest trilogy of all time. I know there's people who are like, no, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever. Have you heard of the Mighty Ducks? Greatest trilogy of all time, okay? I try to explain these things. It just doesn't matter. The story, when you boil it down, it gets very complicated. Have you ever seen this? People are trying to do this now. There's literally things where it's like you can look at a story and actually like you can try to boil it down to its bare essence and try to see if you can make sense out of it. Like I had some friends that were doing this not long ago, and they were trying to explain this on Twitter of like if you were to explain a movie badly. So like if you were to explain Lord of the Rings to your friends, you might explain it like in a certain way, but really if we were to boil it down, you would say it's a group of people who spend 9 hours trying to return jewelry. Like, that's the story. It's not a great story when you think about it in those terms, right? Like, oh no, if we boil it down, it might sound too simplistic. Or if you were to look at like Harry Potter, it's about a man with no nose who has an unhealthy obsession with a young boy, which is a real weird story, right? Things turn real fast in that story. if you think about that. Or what's next, Jewel? We've got, if Star Wars, it's about an absentee father who's trying to get his son to take over the family business, right? This is, again, not a great story, not one that we would think of, right? Or if we look at Twilight is essentially a love triangle between a girl and a dead man who's 100 years old and a dog. So she's trying to decide between the dead 100-year-old man or the dog. And so there's that going on, which is kind of fun. Or there's this one, which I once saw just described as everyone tries the ice bucket challenge. That's terrible. Don't say that. How dare you? This is a church. And so when we take them apart, when we look at the bare essence of these stories, it's not great when we boil it down to what it is. Sometimes it's very hard to understand. If you took those apart, every one of us in this room, if we've seen any of those films or whatever you enjoy watching or whatever you enjoy doing, it's hard to explain those things because sometimes you boil it down to an essence and you're like, oh no, that doesn't really explain the whole story, right? That's like a very small picture, a very small version of what I was trying to get across. And we all deal with this, right? Because what we can say is this is one way to say the story, and it's a very ordinary story. It's literally an extraordinary story. Or we can take the story and we can explain it in the way that its fullness and its beauty really comes out, and that is an extraordinary story, right? And sometimes what we're going to see today is that Jesus tells these stories that are told in an extraordinary way. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, very simple. But when we take it apart and we try to expand that story and look at the entire fullness of that story, what we're going to see, just like we would see in any of those films, any of those trilogies, anything like that, is you're going to see an extraordinary story. That it's so much bigger and broader, and that's my hope is that we understand that. Because what we're experimenting with in this series is that Jesus is telling these simple stories, and he starts these stories with the kingdom of heaven is like. Then he tells a story. Again, he doesn't give us bullet points. He tells a story, and that story might sound very simple, very ordinary, but when we dig into it, what we see is that this kingdom thing that he's talking about is bigger and more beautiful. It's more complex and complicated. It's more countercultural and even counterintuitive than we ever thought it could be. And today's story is no different than that. Today's story, I'm just going to warn you, it's a very short story. We get literally 2 verses. 2 verses of a story. So we might even get out of here early, who knows? And this is a very short story that Jesus tells about a mustard seed. It's not very exciting if you think about it. It's a very ordinary story. But this, in its moment, in its context, is extraordinary. Now, what I want you to do before we dive into this, and I hope this helps every single week that we do this, what I want you to do before we dive into this story is I want you to think of yourself being in these shoes, hearing this story for the first time. Remember, when Jesus he's on a roll at this point. He's telling story after story about the kingdom of heaven is like. And you, as a person, let's say that you're sitting there and you're listening to Jesus teach for the first time. What it says in Matthew 13 is that when he's telling the story, he's out in a boat. You're on a hillside. All the listeners are on a hillside. And they're sitting there listening to Jesus teach. And Jesus starts to teach. And what happens here is what I want you to hear is I want you to hear it and just think about it that you've never heard this story before. You've never even maybe heard of Jesus before. That maybe you're a Jewish person who's sitting there, and what you're feeling right now, just so you know how they're feeling probably, is if you put yourself in their shoes, there's a level of oppression that's going on. They're under a Roman government who doesn't like their religion and doesn't like their whole idea of their way of living. The Roman government has literally started to oppress them. You're starting to see yourself as a person who's probably sitting on this hillside starting to wonder about what this means for you, for your religious beliefs, what this means for you as far as what God has promised. You're also sitting there hoping that there is a Savior coming and there's going to be some kind of salvation from this terrible oppression that you've been under. You're hoping something's going to come and it's going to change. And you might even be hoping that this Jesus guy that you've heard of is the one who's going to change that. You might be hoping that. I want you to put yourself in those shoes for just a second as we read the story, and then I want to go through it together. But I want you to almost think of it on your own first, okay? I want you to hear this story as though you're sitting on that mountainside listening to Jesus teach and tell this story for the first time. This is what he says. Again, just 2 verses. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that birds come and perch in its branches. That's the whole story. Imagine yourself hearing that for the first time. Now you and I might be thinking, and you, if you've been around Restoration for a while, you probably know we teach on the kingdom of heaven for a lot. And this is a big thing for us. We're not so worried about church. We're very worried about kingdom activity, not so much like church activity. And this kingdom activity thing, you might be thinking like, is there anything new we can really pull out of this? Is there anything new we can really learn from this? And my answer to you would be yes, absolutely. That this story and all these stories are more like a diamond than anything else. The more you turn them and you look at them from a different angle, the more you're going to see its beauty. And what I want to do today is try to see this from as many sides as we can, but I want you to think of it first. I want you to have that moment first. So just for a second, again, just for 1 second, I want you to think of what you just heard, and what I want you to do is roll that over in your head. What does that mean, and what do I think it means? And I want you to hear it one more time before we go into this. He told him another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Now, I don't know what comes to mind when you're in this frame of mind. I don't know what you think of when you hear this story. Today I'm going to try, and we're going to try to pull this apart. And let's just tell you, everything we're going to get to today is not the fullness of this story, and you will be able to find more and more depth the more and more you think about it. But we're going to try to kind of pull this apart. Now, here's what I hear as I read this story, and as I thought about it sitting as a Jewish person sitting on this hillside listening to Jesus, is I'm thinking this is a major disappointment, if I'm being honest. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I want this kingdom of heaven thing that I've been promised for hundreds of years, that all this oppression's going to go away, everything's going to get better, all the things are going to work out my way from this point on. And instead, what Jesus says, he says the kingdom of heaven, he doesn't say it's a kingdom of heaven that is like, and he doesn't start with it's some kind of warrior. He doesn't say it's some kind of king. He doesn't say it's some kind of government. He says that it's like a mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? Okay, you still won't, because this is one. And you can't tell that it's even there. This is a mustard seed. It is, here's a bag of them that I ordered from Amazon. And this is how big they are. They are not much to look at. If I'm sitting in that crowd and I hear that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, I'd be like, oh no, oh, that's not what I was hoping for. That's not what I was looking for. I remember when I was in high school, I played sports a lot in high school, and I was very into athletics. And we got this new choir director at our school, and he targeted jocks. He went after people that liked to be in sports because he thought he could change the choral program that way by getting kids that were jocks into this thing. It was kind of like a Glee situation. Anyways, we won't get into that. So he started pulling us into this, and he was promising us, it's super cool to be in choir. You're going to love it. All the cool kids are doing it. And so he promised all the things. And one of the things that he told us is every year we go to Disney, and we sing at Disney, and we get to go in for free, and we hang out at the parks and all that kind of stuff. And then we sing in the nighttime. And he said, and there's a special guest star every year. You're going to love it. You're going to meet somebody really cool who's going to narrate the Christmas story while we sing. And the year that I joined the choir, it was somebody who was a big hero of mine, somebody I thought was really cool. And what I heard in my head was that Joe Montana was going to be there. And it was Joe Montana. Now, Joe Montana, right, this is Hall of Fame quarterback for the 49ers who has, 4 Super Bowls, 3 MVPs. This is the guy. And I was like, I'm going to meet Joe Montana. This is going to be awesome. And so I was so excited to go on this trip. So excited to get there. Now, some people started saying his name wrong, and they kept saying it just a little bit off. And they weren't saying Joe Montana correctly, but I was like, well, they're just not jocks. They don't know stuff about sports. They're not good at pronouncing names. I got a lot of good excuses for why they were wrong. Until we got there, and we got to meet the special guest star. And it was not Joe Montana. It was Joe Montana, who I think is in Criminal Minds and voices some car on the movie Cars, and Cars 2. That's all I know. It was, cool, but not what I was hoping for, I'll be honest with you. The football I had brought to have him sign was going to go to waste. It was going to be real weird to have Joe Montana sign a football. Can you pretend like it's a Criminal Mind? If I'm sitting there, what I'm hearing is I wanted this to be something else, and I thought that it was going to be something else. And actually, if I look to all the clues of the Old Testament, it is something that is like this small seed, this type of thing. We actually see all the way, this is a tangent, but in Daniel, you even see a little bit of this kind of prophecy about this exact thing that Jesus says right here. Yet, there's a lot of people, I guarantee you, that were sitting there going, I want the kingdom of heaven to be something that's bigger than this, that's greater than this, right? And it's a big disappointment. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, you and I still live in a culture and in our own minds, in a way, the same things go on. We still have this same mentality that we want the spectacular. See, the simple is what I like about this. It's simple. Simple is what Jesus is saying. This small little seed is all it's going to be. This is the kingdom of heaven. This is it. And what we want is we don't want the ordinary, we want the extraordinary, right? We're wired for that. There is something in us that just craves the extraordinary, right? We're literally addicted to it. I remember the first time, this is maybe not something pastors are supposed to talk about, but I remember like when I used to play poker just with friends, and we would sit around and play poker. Did anybody used to watch the World Series of Poker on ESPN? Did anybody remember seeing this? It was usually on around 2 a.m., which was, prime time to watch something. And poker was like exciting when you watched it on ESPN, right? You'd see the cards, you'd see everything go on. It was like super exciting. And they would show you these highlight reels of that. It might be like for you watching soccer. This is a sport for me that I have a very hard time with. When I watch the highlights of soccer, I'm like, this sport looks awesome. Then I watch the whole game of soccer, and I'm like, oh no. Oh, they run for a long time for very little reward. You know? And when you watch the full thing, you're like, I don't really know that I like this. But we're so used to living in a culture where we only see the exciting parts. We only see the highlight reels. And we like that, and we get addicted to that, and we forget that there is something that is simple, that there are small moments that matter just as much as the big ones. There were moments leading to that goal that were just as important as the goal itself. There were moments that were leading to those things that were just as important as the thing itself. And what we want the extravagant and we want the extraordinary, and we forget that the kingdom of heaven is not found just in the extraordinary, it's found in the ordinary. And I see this all the time when I look at how we operate in our culture. I mean, literally, I see this in people's dating relationships right now, where it literally becomes a thing where somebody is just not exciting enough, right? And I'm not saying we should settle for less. I'm just saying there comes a point where it becomes like, well, they have to be this, and it's a Prince Charming thing that is just absolutely unrealistic. If you want to talk about like soulmates, then and that whole idea of this romanticism, that we can have that conversation, but it'll be literally next to like unicorns and stuff, because it's not quite real, the mentality we've built up of what this looks like. Sometimes we see this in marriages, that people just get bored, literally just bored with each other. I've counseled people who were like, oh, the spark's just not there like it was. Can you imagine like your great-grandmother going to her mother, your great-great-grandmother, and saying, I think I'm going to leave my husband? And she'd be like, why? Is he hitting you? Is something bad going on? And she'd be like, no, we're just not, spark's just not there. Your great-great-grandmother would be like, suck it up. What are you talking about? I'm not saying we shouldn't like date our spouses and we should continue to pursue that kind of spark. I'm for that. I love that. But the reality is there's sometimes where we just think that everything's supposed to be at this spectacular level, and we're so used to seeing the spectacular, we forget about it. We see it all the time in the church. We forget that there are ordinary moments that are just as important as the extraordinary moments. Right? Like, pastors love this stuff. I'll tell you, I go to pastors' conferences, we have these conversations, and pastors love to one-up each other. It's like it's a game we play, apparently, where you go in, you're like, hey, how are things going at your church? And like, man, we're running like 100 people. Oh, that's really cool. That's really great. That's really great. We baptized 100 people. Well, that's awesome. That's really cool. That's really cool. We're like building a new building. Oh man, that's really great. That's really great. We just donated a whole building to somebody. That's cool. Eventually, you one up each other to the point where somebody talks about an Easter egg drop. That's just the pinnacle of church in America, apparently, is you drop Easter eggs from a helicopter. And we think that's the spectacular that we're supposed to have. That's what we look for. And I'm not saying those things are all bad. What I'm saying is the kingdom of heaven is not found in the spectacular. It's not found in the extraordinary. It's found in the ordinary. Because those moments are cool and they're great. But you know what's just as impactful and what's got just as much kingdom impact is like the moment that like the daughter learns to forgive her father who's hurt her. Or the addict who's being supported by somebody who literally is trying to come out of their addiction, and they've got a family member or a friend who is supporting them out of that addiction. That's just as much kingdom activity. Or the coworker who's going through a terrible time, and the people next to them sets up a meal train so that they don't have to worry about stuff anymore. Or the foster family who just needs their garage cleaned out, and some people show up who don't even know them to clean out their garage. For me, the kingdom of heaven, I grew up in large churches. I grew up in the spectacular. My dad was in charge of the spectacular, to be clear. My dad was a worship pastor. He worked at big churches. This was in the late 80s, early 90s, when the church was really in the mode of like, you need to have a drama team. You need to have like fog machines. And it was like a big pageant. Remember like these types of things? And we did those. We had the living Christmas tree every Christmas, and it was 100 people climbed up in a big tree thing. And every year they'd sing, "Come on, ring those bells, light the Christmas tree." And when they would sing light, the tree would light up, and people every time, I mean, it was amazing. And you'd be like, you've been here for 17 years seeing the same production. We should be past this now. But every year, light the Christmas tree. And it was cool. It was great. It was a great production. That was all really important. However, let me tell you what impacted my life was when my dad, that guy, got sick. And I'm not saying he was doing anything wrong. Again, I'm not saying that. But those are the moments we looked for the spectacle. We thought that was where the church and the kingdom was in those moments. The moments that impacted my life the most was when my dad got sick, and a woman in our church, just one woman who was going through cancer in her own life, would drop off a loaf of bread on our doorstep every single morning at 5 a.m. There would be warm bread on our doorstep, so we had breakfast. That's what she did. It wasn't the church of thousands of people. It wasn't the big production that made an impact in my life that showed me what the kingdom of heaven looked like. It was one person doing what she could do. It was an ordinary moment, not an extraordinary moment. And I think what we want sometimes is we want this big idea where God comes down and he vanquishes all evil, and he starts this huge revival from the top down where somebody starts preaching, everybody just gets saved. We want that kind of sweeping moment. We want a president or a politician or some kind of news anchor or whatever to make some kind of huge top-down moment and make this extraordinary thing happen where the kingdom comes, and that's how it starts. We want, like, if we were to be honest with ourselves, it would look like Amy Grant singing My Grown-Up Christmas List. I mean, that would be what the world would look like. That's like our goal is like, no more lives torn apart, and wars would never start. Time would heal all hearts. Like, that's what we want to see, right? We think that's the kingdom of heaven, and it's this top-down thing where somebody comes in and they set everything up and they fix it all for us. And what we see is the kingdom of heaven is not extraordinary like that. Jesus is saying that's not how it works. It actually works from the bottom up. It works from a seed, a mustard seed that's planted in the ground. It's not the extraordinary, it's the ordinary. We need this bigger picture, this bigger view of it. And again, I think in American culture, we're so swept up with this. I was actually listening to a thing the other day, and there's this thing called slow TV, which is big in Norway. And it made me laugh really hard because people don't think it would work in America. But there's this thing called slow TV. I don't know if the link will work or not. But there's like this thing I thought was fascinating. In Norway, they've started showing this type of television on their public broadcasting. And it's called slow TV. This is slow TV. This is a 9-hour train ride. Uninterrupted. Just 9 hours of a train ride. There are a few cameras set up. There's no actors. There's no dialogue. It's just people watching a 9-hour train ride. That's all they're watching. And in that, you would think that there's so much space for things. Like, we would be so unamused by this, wouldn't we? As an American culture, we would be so uninto this. Yet in their culture, this started to have ratings of about, at one point, about 30% of everybody in Norway was watching this program, was watching a train ride. And they were interviewing the directors of it because they were like, what made you think you should do this? And they were like, we didn't really have anything else to put on the air, so we just put a 9-hour train ride because it fills up a lot of space. And they put it on the air, and up to over a quarter of all of Norway is watching this every minute of this 9-hour train ride. And they said what they found that was interesting as they would talk to people about it is that people liked that there was no longer just the extraordinary, but you could see every bit of the ordinary. It wasn't just the highlight reel that you get with a sitcom, that you get with a sports show, that you get with a news article, whatever. It was this full picture of just life happening. The kingdom shows up in every segment of our life, not just in the extraordinary moments, in the ordinary moments. The person that's next to you at school, the person who's next to you in your workplace, the person who's next to you in your home. That's where the kingdom of heaven shows up. It's ordinary. It's small. It's simple. Now, the second thing I want to get into real quick, and again, we could plumb the depths of this for a while, is that it says this in the second verse. He says, though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that birds come and perch in its branches. Notice this real quickly about the kingdom. Notice this. Is the goal of the tree for the tree to become large? Is that the goal of the tree? No. It's not about the tree. It's about that it provides a place for others. Notice that? He's not saying, so the goal is that we we put up a tree, and the tree gets really big, and the tree just takes over the whole world. And everything has to fall at the mercy of that tree. And that tree is stronger and better than everything else you've seen. The tree is the goal. No, the tree is not the goal. The tree's producing. The tree's selflessness is the goal. And the tree becomes a place for others. Notice he doesn't say it's birds. It's going to be a place for birds to come and perch. And good Christian birds will come and perch. Only the ones that are let in, the ones that look good and they act right. Those ones will come in. We'll ask them, first of all, have you been a baptized bird? We have a bird bath if you'd like to be. And if you would like to get baptized in the bird bath, then we'll let you in to the perch. No, that's not what's happening here. It is for the world. It's for the people, all the things, the creatures. It's for them to find a place within it. The goal of this is not for it to be in and of itself strong. It is strong for the other things. Does that make sense? It's almost like it's tough on itself, but it's tender with the world. There's this idea that it's there for others. And I think there's something inherently selfless about the kingdom of heaven. It's not just there for itself. It's there for others. And I think it's hard for us to realize. There's a book that's great if you get a chance to read it. It's called The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark. And Rodney Stark was a guy who did not believe in Jesus, did not have any relationship with Jesus, but was very interested in Christianity as a whole. He's like, where did Christianity come from, and how did it become what it is today? Which is a great question. And so by his study, and it's a very in-depth study, very good, he talks about in 100 BC and then 200 BC. By 200 BC, in Rome, in Greco-Roman culture, about 1% of all of Greco-Roman culture would say that they were identifying with Jesus. They were Christians. 1%, that was 200 AD. In 200 AD, about 1% would say they were identifying with Jesus. They were part of that with Jesus, right? So we see that in 200, but in 300, that number jumps to 17% of Greco-Roman culture being Christians. That's a big jump. That's a very big jump in 100 years. But then by 400 AD, we now see that nearly 100% of the Greco-Roman culture is now following Jesus. Almost 100%. How do you go in 200 years, in 2 centuries, from basically 1% to 100%? What happened in there? And actually, Rodney Stark, as he wrote this book, found himself starting to have a relationship with Jesus and is now a person who follows Jesus. Because it was just such overwhelming evidence of what was going on in there. And what you would think as you study that is you would think that they got the people in place of power that started this from the top, and they started this whole movement forcing Rome into Christianity. And that does happen later with a guy named Constantine. We don't need to talk about it, but it does happen later on. But the rise of Christianity, the majority of the rise of Christianity, he actually sums up it with one word in multiple points of the book. And that word is that it was a selfless movement. What made Christianity move from person to person, from place to place, and grow so exponentially was not that it was self-serving, but that it was self-sacrificing, that it was selfless in its approach. Up until Jesus, if you ever study all world religions, what you'll find is that up until Jesus, world religions were really for the person to like hoard their God. So it was believed that I had my God, and my God was good, and your God was bad. And I kept my God to myself because if we went to war, my God needed to be on my side, not on your side. So I'm going to keep my God to me, and you keep your God to you. That was the belief of gods, is you didn't share your God with anybody. Jesus actually started, literally, this is not a joke, this is the first evangelical movement in the world. And evangelical meant to share good news with other people. It wasn't to be kept unto oneself. It was the first time that ever happened, that people could actually share their God with another person, and they didn't want to keep it for themselves. I would say what we've turned that into a little bit in America is I do think we've started to change that. I think we've started to say that this is just for me and not for we. This God, this Jesus that I know, maybe it's because we're intimidated by other people or we're scared to share our faith. Maybe that's part of it. But I also think there's a little bit of self-righteousness that says, no, I've got God and you don't get that God. I've got Jesus, you don't get to have that Jesus because I've earned it and I've worked for it and it's for me and you don't get to have that because you've messed up a whole lot. And what we're seeing here is that the kingdom of heaven is something that grows and gets stronger so that it can survive and then share with others. It is inherently a selfless movement. And so it's not just for itself. It is there for the birds to come and perch in its branches. I even think it's interesting. This isn't highly necessary to understand, but sometimes when Jesus talks about birds in the New Testament, sometimes he's just talking about birds. And every once in a while, he's actually talking about Rome. Sometimes it's just kind of an Easter egg he kind of shares sometimes. But sometimes he talks about Rome because they had the war eagle as part of that was their symbol. And the war eagle would go out in front of the Roman army. And sometimes he talks about the Roman Empire as a bird. When he says birds have nests and foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head, it's believed he's talking about Rome. It's interesting that he's talking about Rome possibly, this is just a possible tie-in, to being Rome as the ones who come in and they perch in the branches of this kingdom that has been made for them to be included in that as well. Just a fun fact. Anyways, but we see those things happen. We see that it's inherently, it is a selfless thing. It is a simple thing. And lastly, the other thing I want to kind of point to is that I think it's a scalable thing. Jesus, this is one of the few things that he tells two different stories about the same object. Jesus usually tells stories about different objects. He usually switches it up as he does his teaching. This is one of the few things that he keeps the same object and he talks about in two places. If you're not familiar with this, he talks about the same thing, the mustard seed, in chapter 17 of Matthew. If you flip over, if you have a Bible, if you're following along, Matthew chapter 17, verse 20, he also talks about a mustard seed. This is a different story. These are not the same parable, but he's using the same picture for us to understand. And he says, he replied to them, "You have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Now, notice in this how many times what he's talking about here is not just that you have to have, like, you can do anything you want because you're a good person or whatever. You have to have faith. But notice what he's putting, whose onus he's putting this on, is that the faith has to come from you. You have to, notice how many times he says you in that sentence, by the way. He says you a lot. He's talking to you. You have to have faith in the right place. And when that happens, the kingdom will be seen. What I think we can take from this, and I just want to put this out there, is I think many times we want to relegate the kingdom work to somebody else. We want to say, I would like to do this, but it's mostly somebody else's responsibility. And let me just tell you where I hear that the most. As a pastor, can't tell you how many times people want me to be the one that does certain kingdom work. Jesus isn't just talking to pastors here, but I hear this a lot. There's something that needs to be done in my neighborhood. There's something that needs to be done in my workplace. Pastor, would you pray for this person? Would you do this for that person? Would you go to their house and meet with it? Whatever. And I'm not saying I'm against that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I understand that's my role in some ways. But on the other hand, my first question usually is, well, what have you done? Because from what I'm reading in that passage, it doesn't just say if pastors have faith the size of a mustard seed. It says if you, like all of you, if any of you have that. And what we do is we kind of turn these things to say that's not my responsibility, that's not my spot, and I'll find somebody else to do the kingdom work because that's not for me, that's for somebody else. And what I will say here is I think that the size of the kingdom you're going to see is based on the amount of faith that you already have. You're going to see more kingdom the more faith you have. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed. And he says that talking about it, you will move mountains. And I think the same is true of what he's talking about with the mustard seed and the kingdom. The more faith you have, the more kingdom you're going to see. They're directly correlated. And some of us, what we've done is we've said, I think I don't have that faith, but I'll find somebody who does. What if you're the one who's already been placed in that spot? What if you're the mustard seed? The simple and the selfless that's been placed in the position you're in for this exact reason. What if God's not saying you need to go find somebody else to do the kingdom work? I put you here to do the kingdom work. Because maybe you might say, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Maybe you're exactly in the right spot for that. Because maybe Jesus is saying, you are the simple thing I want to use just to be selfless in the space you're in. And the scale of what is possible is out of control if you'll just do it. I was reading in Eugene Peterson's book. He has a pretty great book that's called So You Think You Can Run with Horses, which is a weird name. What makes you think you can race against horses? And he writes this about fan clubs. And he was writing about how sometimes we want other people to do the work for us. We want other people to go do that kingdom work or do the work for us. And he said this, we like fan clubs. Fan clubs encourage secondhand living. Through pictures and memorabilia, autographs, and tourist visits, we associate with someone whose life is, we think, more exciting, more extraordinary, and glamorous than our own. We find diversion from our own humdrum existence by riding on the coattails of someone exotic. We see what is possible. Anyone and everyone is able to live a zestful life that spills out of the stereotype containers that a sin-inhibited society provides. Such lives fuse spontaneity and purpose and green with desiccated landscape and meaning. And now we see how it is possible. By plunging into a life of faith, participating in what God initiates in each life, and exploring what God is doing in each event. He says that in every event, we can also be those who do this. We don't just need a fan club. We don't need to just be ones that let other people do the work. And maybe you might think, again, that's not for me. But what I would say is that Jesus is talking exactly about you, because remember, Jesus is not talking about the extraordinary. He's talking about the ordinary. The kingdom of heaven does not show up just in extraordinary moments. It happens in the ordinary, everyday moments. In the moments where we will choose that simplicity of the kingdom, in the moments where we will choose to be selfless in the kingdom, in the moments where we're excited to see the scale of our faith show how great this kingdom can be. So maybe there's some things in your life, maybe there's some moments in your life that you want to look at and you want to think, how in the moments I'm in can I show that? Let me tell you, just for me, as we've been kind of just in life, right now, you've probably had a new pattern of your life, right? You're probably going to places you haven't gone to before, or showing back up to places you haven't been to a long time. Like maybe it's your gym, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's you've changed your patterns a little bit of I don't go to this thing anymore, but I go to this now. Maybe it's clubs or activities you're a part of. Your life's probably shifted a little bit in this. Maybe you're not doing the same activities you were doing before, you're doing new ones. And that's all good. I would encourage you right now, for me, I'm trying to think about intentionally, what are the spaces that God's put me in now? How can I start new conversations, new friendships, new relationships in the new places God's put me in? How can I be a person who shows that kingdom of heaven in these simple, extraordinary moments? I would encourage you to think about your week and your new patterns. What are those things looking like, and how can you bring the kingdom of heaven into the places that you're in right now? If you would, let's stand together and pray as we close. We're going to sing, and I'd love to just have you think about that in your own life. What are the simple things you can do? What are the extraordinary things that you can do in your life, in your daily routine to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth? Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you so much for this simple story that tells us so much. I thank you for reminding us that this kingdom of heaven is not some big, extravagant thing. It's not an extraordinary thing. It is actually a very, very ordinary thing. It doesn't just show up in these spectacular moments. It shows up in everyday life. I pray we would be people who would bring that kingdom of heaven to earth in our everyday life. In the normal moments and the things we go through. I pray right now you would bring to mind the people around us who we can be those people for. I pray you would bring to mind the people around us who we can share the kingdom of heaven with. Would you remind us right now, just think of the people in our offices, in our daily routines, in our homes, in our schools, in our families, just the people around us that we are called to bring the kingdom of heaven to. Would you remind us of that? May we get off the sidelines, not be people who are looking at the bigger, at people that outside of us that could do the work, but will we be looking at what you're calling us to do right now, individually? What are the things we can do to share this kingdom of heaven with others? I thank you so much for loving us and including us in this. Thank you so much for using us, even though we are just extraordinary people, to bring your extraordinary kingdom here to earth. We love you so much. Praise things in your name. Amen.
I see the King of Glory coming on the clouds with fire. The whole earth shakes. The whole earth shakes.
have a great week, and please sign up for those the different things that you can be a part of with the Identity Series, with the job fair, all the different things we have going on. Love to see you at all of those things, as many of those things you can do. And yeah, have a great week. We'll see you back here next Sunday.